All right, YouTube. This is Detroit's HPTV coming to you out of Detroit. I got an interesting topic for this Sunday. It's about shadow work. Ran across an interesting journal. It's called the Shadow Work Journal. And a lot of people may not know what the shadow is, but the shadow is traumas. Now, a lot of black people need shadow work in the shadow work journal more than they need religion, because religion doesn't get to the point to where you deal with your own trauma. See, a person is like a carrot. You know, you see the leaves, but the carrot is under the ground. But you recognize the plant from the leaves, but you never see the carrot until you dig it up. That's how a lot of people are mentally. You see them on the outside, which is the flower part, but the real them is the carrot underground. And in the black community, majority of us suffer from PTSD, especially us that came up in the 60s and 70s, because during that time, black people were engaged in civil rights movement and nonviolence, but they were beating the hell out of their children. They were dogging their family members. You had a lot of incest and other stuff going on with the young women. You know what I mean? There was a lot of brutality within the home that was told, don't talk about what goes on inside of this house. And then you had a lot of people being scapegoated. The first part of this series I'm going to deal with is the scapegoat. And I got this lady, check it out. This is for fair usage, educational purpose. Check out what she said. This is about the scapegoat aspect.
I'm going to start this video with a question. How many of you were the scapegoat in a narcissistic family system? Because if you were, then this video really is for you. We're really going to break down today, talking about that idea of the family role a person has, and today we're going to talk about the scapegoat. What happens to the scapegoats when they get to adulthood? We're going to talk about the good and the bad of that, because it's not all bad, it's not all good. So let's take that on. And those of you who are scapegoats in your family system, please drop in the comments your thoughts about how being the scapegoat in a narcissistic family system affected you as an adult. And then let's see, hopefully this video addresses some of that. Because this is a question people have. Say, yeah, great, I knew I was a scapegoat as a kid. But then the question is then, like, do you ever wonder what happens to the scapegoat when they grow up? And that's what I'm hoping to be able to answer today. Family roles are so important to understand because it can really set us up to understand
each stitch a connection between elegant materials, between artisan.
What happens to us in terms of our roles in adult relationships. All of you know the family roles if you've been listening to me, and so much of my work in this area around this has been to describe these roles and help people understand familial narcissistic abuse and how it affects them in adult relationships and in adult roles. So
I'm going to start right there what she said. Familial narcissistic abuse. Like, are you a person who you really get angry when you're having a conversation? Somebody may cut you off, but you get mad, it throws your whole track of what you were trying to say because you got cut off. 9 times out of 10, that's related to a trauma. 9 times out of 10, people like that were always told to shut up or be quiet, or they were marginalized when they had something that they wanted to say or something they were feeling. They were shut down. So as adults, when you cut them off, it triggers them. They get angry. The whole conversation changes. The energy of the conversation changes because that person has just been triggered because of a trauma of never being heard, always being told to be quiet, or however it went. But 9 out of 10, that's the carrot, and that's a part of that shadow. You'll see other people that were the target in the family. They was the one to always do something wrong. They were the one always being blamed. They were the one always in trouble. They were the ones that always made to look bad. But they were no different than any other kid because they 9 out of 10, they were always getting in trouble with other children. But for some reason, this one child was the target for a lot of anger and a lot of abuse if the parents are narcissists. I'm going to share you some of my life. As a young man and as a kid, I was the scapegoat of my family. Everything I did was wrong. I got the blame for everything that happened. My mother left my father for a whole nother man. Just moved out and left him. She convinced him that it had something to do with my behavior as a kid. Think about that. Your mother leaves your father, leaves the family, breaks the family up. But she says it's because of your behavior and you a kid. But then you later find out he had another whole man on the other side of town. And when you go to visit her, he walking through her new place like it's his. But you become the scapegoat. In your heart, you feel like I'm the reason the family broke up. I'm the reason this happened. I'm the reason ain't nothing getting wrong. And you embrace that. You embrace that psychologically. It creates psychological trauma, and you act that out. That's no different when a young girl is molested, but she's told not to tell on the uncle or the weirdo that did it because it's going to break the family up. So she has to eat up that trauma and hold that trauma, and it affects her all through life in different relationships because the narcissist in the family, he always or she always has to look good. They always have to look like they're this giving person. You'll see the narcissists, they're very nice and respectable to the neighbors and the people outside the house. But once they come into the house, they become terrorists. They become abusers. They become vile and very dangerous people psychologically if they're raising children. Let me play some more.
I want to start with the type that our many surveys that we've done across seminars and whatnot have shown to be probably what's the most common family role in a narcissistic family system, and that's the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the person that gets the wrath of the narcissistic parent or parents or other narcissistic extended family members. They are the ones that bear the brunt of the gaslighting, the invalidation, the rage.
She made an interesting point. The narcissist parents will recruit their siblings. Have you ever been in one of those families, them old families, them baby boomer families where they're closer to their siblings than they are to their own kids? So they siblings become another threat to the sanity of the person who's being scapegoated because they repeat everything negative that you may have done. Like if your name is John, you know, the narcissist as your parent tells their brother, you know, Jimmy or John, he broke a window and he's always doing something. That sibling gets off the phone and repeats it to his kids and repeats it in his house. You know what Johnny did over there? My sister just called and told me he broke a window and blah 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 blah. And they use you as a lesson for the other kids over there. That's probably your first cousins. So now your uncle, your first cousins, your grandparents, whoever that listens to the narcissist have a preconceived notion about who you are, what you're going to be, and he's bad. That's when you start seeing, I don't want you going over there playing with that cousin. That cousin's bad. That cousin's going to jail. That cousin's going to be in trouble. But in all actuality, the narcissist is alienating the scapegoat so that the abuse and the gratification that they get from abusing that scapegoat continues indefinitely.
They're blamed for everything, and scapegoats often have a childhood characterized by walking every day on eggshells. So, again, as you think about if this is you, what are the things that you experienced in childhood? And as this series slowly unfolds over time, I know many of you identify with more than one type. We'll talk about how those different types may affect you in adulthood. So let's talk about what happens to the scapegoat. The scapegoated child in the family system is the most likely to have the most significant mental health impacts of childhood. Remember, this is an entire childhood that has been pockmarked by manipulation, rage, emotional abuse, and perhaps also physical and other forms of abuse, by being gaslighted. And all of this can result in a wide spectrum of issues in adulthood, including patterns that we observe in complex PTSD, anxiety, depression, as well as a chronic state of living in self doubt, self blame, major impacts on self esteem, difficulties with decision making, and a daily mantra of feeling not good enough. There can also be long term decision.
This stuff gets so deep. And when you start doing the shadow work, and this is a very good book, I think all Black people in America need to have a shadow workbook journal, because you need to find out exactly why you feel the way you feel. Religion is not going to do it for you, because religion is so on the surface that it doesn't deal with the things that you don't even tell the pastor. And 9 times out of 10, you tell one of these country preachers that, you've been getting beat with a extension cord or a razor strap. They like, yeah, spare the rod, sport a child. They got that type of mentality because they're indoctrinated with European colonialization that says that you must be brought to heel if you're Black. Black people need shadow work. They need to deal with their demons. We call them demons. We call them generational curses. But we are a community that's walking around here like that, and it's being exploited by the power that be, because they understand psychology. They know what we've been taught. They know the images that they show of us.
Or behavioral outcomes. And these can include things like maladaptive coping, as we call it. And those maladaptive coping is just bad coping, like using substances to cope or other dysregulated behaviors, like using food to cope, using shopping, using gambling, any of that. And most pointedly, having difficulties in.
I'm gonna stop there again, because you see, a lot of our Black women, they have shopping addictions, and they live beyond their means, and they live in debt, and that's an indication that they were deprived of things. That's what that means. When you see somebody with a shopping addiction, they were deprived of things. They were deprived of things they may have wanted. They might have been given hand-me-downs, or they just never, if they wanted a particular pair of shoes, the parents would get the cheapest ones, and they psychologically ingrained in them that you don't deserve this unless you do this, that, and the other. So everything was contractual, and it was all a part of psychological abuse. When you see somebody that's been struggling with drugs for years, trying to mask different hurts and pains, you look at them, you might come a crackhead, an alcoholic, or whatever terminology you may use to degrade them. You still feeding into the narcissist creation of a community scapegoat.
In adult relationships, and choosing partners who replicate the invalidation cycle of childhood, choosing partners who recapitulate all of your mantras about not being enough. In addition, scapegoats tend to sell themselves short throughout their lives. They may not fully pursue educational or professional goals, still hearing their narcissistic parents' voice in their heads. Oh, come on. Who do you think you are? Really? Do you really think you can do that? Okay, let's see how you do at that. That contemptuous disregard for your goals. What I see most often for the scapegoat is the eternal cycle of unhealthy relationships, trying to work through the dysfunction of the childhood relationships through the adult relationships, instead of understanding clearly that that original family system, the family of origin, or that the people in it were narcissistic, and to recognize that it's not your fault, that these people are not going to change, and most importantly, that you did deserve better. Some people don't get that lesson or understanding until much later in life, having survived horrible adult relationships and often painful, expensive divorces, physically or emotionally abusive relationships, and constantly blaming themselves. Because that, to me, is the most painful legacy the scapegoat often carries: self blame.
17,000 house fires occur each year in Australia. What many people don't realise is they all.
Another issue.
I'm gonna stop right there, interject. Could you imagine how many people are going through life, their jobs, their relationships, always feeling they're not worthy of it. They carry a bunch of guilt and they always waiting on the next shoe to drop. You know what I mean? That's the guy. He gets in a relationship and he gets a place and he lives with a woman, but he's always got his bags ready to pack. He's always ready to leave. First sign of an argument or whatever, it always becomes, I'm gonna leave. It gets hostile, gets combative, because this person is psychologically damaged and has an inclination toward self-destructive behavior because he's been scapegoated. He knows that he is to be sacrificed. If something goes bad in the relationship, he's to be sacrificed. He's to be left. He's to be blamed. He's to be ridiculed. It's going to be his fault. This is his psychosis. This is how he thinks. Or her. This is how she thinks. So she's always ready to go. Because the last thing as an adult that the scapegoat wants to experience is more dehumanized and degrading abuse or language. So you think about us as black people who came from slavery and Jim Crow and all of that, and the genetic trauma that we inherit, then the trauma that we go through if we're in narcissistic families, in communities, we become totally broken people for long periods of time until you realize, like she said, you deserved better. Don't wait on the narcissist to apologize, make amends. That's not ever going to come because your role in that family dynamic has already been codified. In the family dynamic, you are that person. You are that person. As long as the narcissist is healthy and able to wield influence within the family dynamic. Now, when they get sick and they have diabetes and they start having cancer, and then they'll come around and they start reaching out because now the guilt comes on them because they know they're finna meet their maker. That's a lot of these older people that sit back on their pension and watch the young people go through life. They don't care about nothing but their narcissistic idea of who they are. They're the real damaged people, but they're the parents. They produce this generation of cold, malicious, heartless people. And if you follow, I'm going to do a series on the shadow work so you can see. Because as a young man, I stayed in trouble. You know what I mean? I was told by my parents that I was bad and started being bad at 2 years old. I was incorrigible at 2 years old. It took for me to have children of my own to really unravel the level of abuse psychologically that did to me because I looked at my own 2 year and know that's our baby. That baby is not going to do or learn anything other than what I teach it. So if the baby is bad and the baby has a behavioral problem, guess what? I did that. I did that. So the narcissist, even in a baby, they'll see fault in an infant. Those are the ones that beat the kids and they do all kind of things to babies because in their narcissistic mind, they have to be right. They have to be right. If they feeding the baby and the baby keep crying, it's the baby's fault, but they didn't even check to see if the baby was wet and needed a diaper change. They get mad at the baby, but they're still not problem solving or using critical analysis. They call it in narcissistic thinking, even all the way down to children.
That scapegoated people from narcissistic family systems can face is that in many cases, they may actually get stuck in their family of origin. They may get caught up in the narrative of hope that the family will change, or they will internalize the manipulation and guilt and keep feeling responsible for their family of origin. And so they may get fully stuck in the system, never feeling that they can go cast out on their own and find their own path in life and get away from the toxicity. And they may also forever feel responsible for this manipulative system that is
And I want to add something in the manipulative system. Most of the narcissists, and this not everybody go to church. I'm not against the church. But on Sunday morning is the biggest congregation of abusers and narcissists at the church. That's where they go to dress in the cloth of righteousness and self-decency and self-respect among other peers of narcissists and even some believers. That's the place they go. When you will see, the narcissist always acts like Jesus or God belongs to them. They'll pray and there'll be a curse on you at the same time. Well, just God gonna show you. They won't put God on you. Well, Jesus gonna show you. The devil gonna. They even use religion as a way to scapegoat you and to take the self-work that they need to be doing on themselves and ignore it. And they become hellions and they create the demons that we see in these young people.
Is all too happy to keep the scapegoat in their place and not allow them to become their full selves. But all is not lost. I really believe the scapegoat has very real gifts. And these gifts, if they can be dusted off and really regarded, can be a critical part of healing. Foremost amongst these gifts is that people who are in the scapegoat role are very empathic. Now, as a sidebar, I will say that there is unfortunately a small group of scapegoats whose personalities did get badly shaped by the post-trauma of the chronic psychological abuse of a narcissistic family. And in those cases, we could see a pattern that looks more like covert narcissism. So I do think there's a subset of scapegoats who go on to narcissism. But in the vast majority, there is a deep empathy, sometimes too much empathy. Maybe that is because as a child, they had a rich fantasy life around how they had hoped to be treated. Maybe it's inherent.
Now I'm gonna interject something there on scapegoats that become empaths. In this society, walking around with too much empathy and too much care, you run across the passive aggressive narcissist. And then the passive aggressive narcissist, they peep that you have a need to try to vindicate yourself in a relationship, and they'll take over and they'll manipulate you through passive aggression. Them the ones that's always sad in your face. They always got a sad story to make you feel for them. But at the same time, it's a manipulation because they peeped in your character that you're working through something to validate yourself by being a better person to people that you have been treated. So the layers get deep.
Parent in the child who was the scapegoat because they were temperamentally empathic. And so that almost made them an easier target for the narcissistic parent because that scapegoated child, being empathic, would be less likely to fight back. People who had and who have that scapegoat role are often very, almost too solicitous and concerned about the needs of others, which may have been a learned behavior that they acquired to try to be safe in childhood, always serving the narcissistic parent's needs to avoid abuse and keep the family system a little bit peaceful. And always putting other people's needs before their own, which is not surprising because they were often raised to do that as children. However, in a healthy relationship, that warmth and that empathy and awareness of others actually can be a gift that scapegoated children may actually develop in adulthood. And there's another gift I really do see that scapegoated people have, although in order to access this gift, you often need a really good course of therapy with a therapist who actually understands trauma and narcissistic abuse. One day, whether it is to protect.
Let me talk about narcissistic abuse in the hands of people in social media. These are the people. Have you ever seen this man of fears guys and the incel guys? How they always, every problem in society and in the community, they put on black women. Then on the flip side, you have the narcissistic women. Everything wrong in their life, they put on black men. The baby daddy that left him, the Negro ain't no good. You know, they got this new one where they always attacking your masculinity and whatever. Just look at your timeline. You see all these narcissists all day talking about somebody else instead of working on their own issues. Just look at your timeline. What they say about men, what the men say about women. And this is in the black community of people who are already marginalized and oppressed, sit up all day and degrade and humiliate each other on social media to make themselves feel good for likes and views. You got to tell me that's sick. That's sick. All day long, just comment after comment, or the ones that's always showing their body, always something provocative. The level of mental illness that comes from traumatic abuses as young people and as Black Americans is at a fever pitch to the point to where we are totally pawns on the chessboard when it comes to Democrats, Republicans, or church, anybody. We're pawns because they play on the scapegoat mentality, and you always following narcissists. The narcissist is the one that says he gonna tell you what God want for you. That's the narcissist. The narcissist is the one gonna tell you what you're doing wrong, and then you find out later that he's doing way worse than you. There's many layers. I'm telling you, you gotta work on your mentality.
Protect the child in themselves who was never protected, or whether it is because they actually enter, a scapegoated person actually enters a healthy relationship in adulthood and recognizes what healthy love looks like and experiences it, and even supported by their partner feels safer to set a boundary, or whether it's therapy and a therapist saying, what happened to you in childhood was not okay and you are not to blame. Or whether it's that scapegoated person just hits that wall and says, enough, whatever it is. People who are in that scapegoated role can actually become quite good at going no contact, or at least setting really, really firm boundaries and no longer engaging with their family of origin. Looking back on all the hurt down today, talking about that idea of the family role a person has, and today we're going to talk about the scapegoat. They were temperamentally empathic.
Now I messed it up a little bit. I'm gonna show you another part. Now, I had 3 other siblings. My brother died at 18 in a car accident. My sister was 5'2", 350 pounds, almost 400 pounds. She had an eating disorder. I had another sister, infant death. But my brother was an alcoholic from the time he was maybe 12 until he died. And he died at 18. So think about that. 12 years old, alcoholic. And I'm talking about hard liquor. We ain't talking about no beer. I'm talking about a 12-year-old drinking hard liquor. My sister ate so much, Jello packs. She would eat the Jello powder. Just eat Jello powder. She would have food crammed up under her mattress. You would have to lift her mattress, and you see all kind of smashed food. You know what I mean? Till she ended up actually at 48 dying at my parents'. She only went there because her apartment had been flooded, so she went to stay there while they worked on her apartment and had a heart attack just being in the house with those narcissists. But to this day, with me being the last surviving sibling, I have no contact with them. No contact. People be like, "Oh, why you don't go over there and see him? Why you don't talk to him?" Why would I? These narcissists had destroyed me emotionally, confidence, my self-esteem, a lot of things about my personality. You know what I mean? So when I was old enough to get into the streets, I took that same mentality into the streets with me. You know what I mean? Already damaged. I'm not gonna let you play with me. You play with me, I'm up in the stick. You know what I mean? Which led me to prison. which is where the narcissists wanted me to be. They wanted me there so that they could say, I told you so. You was going to end up there. You was going to end up there. But now at least we know where you at. So I went through that with them. But when I came home and I went to college and got degrees and started my own family, they hated it. Everything was negative. When I was going to college, oh, he going to mess that up. He ain't going to do it. Woo. And I learned to stay away from them because I realized that my failure was directly attached to what they viewed as success in themselves, even though they were my parents. So until I was able to just break away from them totally, I was always suffering through relationships because they were nice to the neighbors and nice to strangers, but they were totally sadistic and narcissists with their children and within their homes. And they kept big house, or you being there, you don't know, a house of horrors. But until you started really doing the shadow work and looking at yourself, you would never understand the origin of your attitude. You know what I mean? You know what it's like going through life not knowing why everything triggers you. Everything triggers you. And again, you got to get a shadow work journal and start dealing with your own issues and your own triggers, and you will see that you really deserve better.
And so that almost made them an easier target for the narcissistic parent because that scapegoated child, being empathic, would be less likely to fight back. People who had and who have that scapegoat role are often very, almost too solicitous and concerned about the needs of others, which may have been a learned behavior that they acquired to try to be safe in childhood, always serving the narcissistic parent's needs to avoid abuse and keep the family system a little bit peaceful. And always putting other people's needs before their own, which is not surprising because they were often raised to do that as children. However, in a healthy relationship, that warmth and that empathy and awareness of others actually can be a gift that scapegoated children may actually develop in adulthood. And there's another gift I really do see that scapegoated people have, although in order to access this gift, you often need a really good course of therapy with a therapist who actually understands trauma and narcissistic abuse. One day, whether it is to protect the child in themselves who was never protected, or whether it is because they actually enter, a scapegoated person actually enters a healthy relationship in adulthood and recognizes what healthy love looks like and experiences it, and even supported by their partner feels safer to set a boundary, or whether it's therapy and a therapist saying, what happened to you in childhood was not okay and you are not to blame. Or whether it's that scapegoated person just hits that wall and says, enough, whatever it is, people who are in that scapegoated role can actually become quite good at going no contact, or at least setting really, really firm boundaries and no longer engaging with their family of origin. Looking back on all the hurt and pain, they feel like, I don't know these people anything.
This is a neoprene standard can coolie. It's available with single ink screen print.
In fact, my goal for scapegoated people is to really that they understand the dynamics of narcissism, especially in long-term relationships, and to recognize that it does not change. And especially when you find yourself in a scapegoated role, that they will see you as only that, not only as supply, but as a punching bag too. I really, really hope for scapegoats to recognize that they have always been more than enough, and that the constant manipulations of childhood were a projection by a psychologically stunted parent who projected their own inadequacies and insecurities onto their children. Once you fully, truly understand that, kind of shrugging your shoulders and either ending contact or at the very least minimizing contact and engagement to an extreme degree starts to feel easy. Because frankly, once the people who had these scapegoated roles can shrug them off and maybe even gain meaning and purpose from the suffering of these roles, they really become our rock stars. They can become champions of the oppressed. They can become advocates. They bring tremendous.
Okay. I'm going to stop here, but I want to give you a brief on the one I'm going to do next on this same topic, which is, okay, that one was what happened to the scapegoat in adulthood. This is when narcissists lose their scapegoat. I just want you to hear a little bit about this. I'm not going to start this whole. When a narcissist
In the family.
loses the scapegoat.
On everything you wanted, didn't want to know, and things you didn't even know you didn't know about narcissism. So we're going to be taking on a very interesting question today of what the narcissist does when they lose their scapegoat. Before we get to that, gentle reminder, if you want information on the healing program that we're starting this year, please go to the video notes, click that link to get the information. And then we are going to also, I'm also going to remind you to please subscribe to this channel if you're new to this community. Always feel free to share comments about this because that's where we also sometimes get more new ideas, and it allows the conversation to expand. So thank you again for being part of this YouTube community, and let's answer this question. What does the narcissist do when they lose their scapegoat? Well, for any of you who are currently or have been a scapegoat with the narcissist, this is a question that comes up a lot, like, because there's a lot of fantasy around it, like what happens when they no longer have me? Let's break it down. And I would also love to hear from you. If any of you were the scapegoat and you did finally find a way to step away, what happened when you stepped away?
Get up to 6 accounts per household and unlimited DVR space included with YouTube TV.
It's very, very, very hard for the scapegoat to pull away from the narcissist. The trauma bonding is so intense. But let's talk about it. The scapegoat, to be the scapegoat, this is a term that is most often used to describe the role somebody has in a narcissistic family system. It's the person or people in a narcissistic family system that get the worst of the narcissistic person's abuse, and because of the triangulation, the narcissist is often able to recruit other family or other members of the family system to perpetrate more abuse against the scapegoat, who over time becomes the punching bag for everyone in the family system. The scapegoat is subjected to criticism, mockery, humiliation, rage, sometimes physical or other forms of abuse, and becomes the repository of the narcissist's shame. It's as though the mere existence of the scapegoat brings out a sense of shame in the narcissistic person, and so they abuse the scapegoat even more. Now, scapegoating can...
Now, it took for me, like I said, to do shadow work. I went through a period to where I used to, my mail would come to my mother's house, come to my parents' house. You grew up there, whatever, you still would get mail. And after I had distanced myself, she disliked me so much that when I would call and ask that I have mail, she would put the mail in a little store bag, set it on the porch, lock the screen, and lock the door so she didn't even have to look at me. And at this time, I was going to college. I hadn't been living home. I was like, what is this about? I'm walking past the neighbors and waving at the neighbors, and my mail is in the trash bag thrown on the porch at a house I grew up in, because she couldn't stand to look at me and see the fact that I was no longer the scapegoat. So now I'm gonna try to abuse you with this. You're not coming out of that. I don't care what they're telling you at college that you're on the dean's. I don't care what anybody is telling you. I don't care that you have a good relationship. I don't care. When you come over here, you must feel shame. For real. You must feel shame.
Can happen in other narcissistic systems as well, including workplaces, groups of friends, or even other kinds of organized groups, community groups, any kind of group. It's only since there's a narcissist sort of in that system, and there's someone that they're taking something out at, there's a scapegoat in it, right? The narcissist in some ways gets their power from other people watching fearfully at what is happening to the scapegoat and wanting to avoid that fate for themselves. And just like in any cult, other people get pulled into the narcissistic person's magnetic fold and join the scapegoating for any number of reasons: to win over the narcissist, to keep themselves safe in the system, to survive, perhaps to get their own power in the system. And because some of the people who join into the scapegoating are narcissistic themselves. To be a scapegoat is an absolutely terrible way to have to spend a childhood. It impacts attachment, it generates core wounds, it impairs a sense of safety in the world and identity development. Scapegoats may experience significant anxiety not only in childhood but also adulthood, self-devaluation, issues with self-esteem, holding limiting beliefs about the self, mood symptoms like depression, and basically scapegoats will spend a lifetime selling themselves short and often don't fully enact their potential. In more severe cases, scapegoated children, as they become older, may be at risk for even more dangerous behaviors, including self-harm, substance use, disordered eating, and other forms of dangerous acting out. It is an incredibly heavy, painful legacy to carry. However, though, here's the million-dollar question. What happens when a narcissistic person loses their scapegoat? It's really quite interesting because in many ways, the narcissistic person uses the scapegoat to regulate. The narcissistic person is incapable of regulating disappointment, frustration, stress, or just basically not getting to get their way. So they lash out, and they lash out at easy targets, and the scapegoat is often an easy target. As I said, for any number of reasons, the scapegoat often evokes shame in the narcissist, which obviously leads to rage. And that shame will get multiplied because the narcissist.
I remember, I'm just going to give you stories about narcissistic behavior from my life, my journey through shadow work. I remember I had an aunt, and my aunt was like 6 years older than me. She'd always give me books, and I looked through the books that she would give me, her old school books or whatever. So one day I'm in my room, and I had been at my grandparents' house. She had gave me a book, a math book that she had worked on. I don't even know why I even wanted it. She had already finished the problems in it or whatever. So I'm looking through the book. My father comes home, asks me what I'm doing, looks over my shoulder, looks into the book, and starts to say, well, you're doing this wrong or whatever. You can't tell him no. He stood over my shoulder for hours, scratching gravel out his head, me crying into the book, him berating me, going off, hitting me and everything, because I was like in the fourth grade, and this was a high school book that I had just picked up, and he didn't know anything about what was in the book. He could barely read, he could barely write, and I was good at those things. So the fact that I could do those things drove him mad. My mother, she just stayed out the way because her narcissism was different. But what she's saying is their shame. Think about it. Why would you dog your own kid?
The narcissist is aware at some level that their treatment of the scapegoat is not okay, and they keep doing it, which in essence, again, the narcissist knows at a deep, unprocessed level makes them a horrible person, and they can't tolerate that idea of being a horrible person, and so bang, more rage, inevitably directed at the scapegoat.
Like, this is insane. This product, the Papa Meniere's, it's a perfect way for a...
I gotta say, some of my favorite stories of narcissistic abuse survivorship are when I hear about the scapegoat walking away. It sends chills down my spine and joy into my heart. Because of the trauma-bonded nature of the scapegoat narcissistic relationship, it's one of the hardest things a person can do. Walking away may not always be physically walking away and leaving the situation. It may in some cases be mentally cutting out, but I gotta tell you, physically getting out completely is really fantastic. It does happen. It's not easy. Now, when it does happen, when a scapegoat leaves the narcissist, a few things happen. First, the narcissist now has to find a new way to regulate. Now, initially, they will continue to lash out at the scapegoat, even if they're not there. They'll say, "Who do you think you are? Where the hell did you go? Do you really think you're going to be able to make it in the world without me? You're a loser. You're going to be back." They'll say those kinds of things. That can go on for a while. It might happen by text or email, social media. The scapegoat has to be steadfast and be willing to block as much of this contact as possible. At some point, if the scapegoat can be resolute and not snap back, then the narcissistic person needs to find a new person to abuse. Now, there is that day, if the scapegoat's gone, the narcissist may find some new targets, perhaps the enablers in their midst, or someone else they devalued, but that was originally spared the worst of the narcissistic person's abuse because the scapegoat was around. The scapegoat is why narcissistic people often still have people around them, because they were all spared the abuse. But when the scapegoat is gone, then we may see that the narcissist needs to yell at someone. So now more and more people start seeing how bad the narcissist behavior is. Some may even try to pull the scapegoat back into the system for no other reason so that they can stop being yelled at by the narcissist and the scapegoat can take the punches again. If you're a scapegoat, don't fall for that.
I'm going to end on that note. And I'm going to do another one on this because I've experienced that. When you break away from the narcissist, their number one enabler reaches back out to you, and you ain't been around, and come on back around the family. No, like she says, don't ever go back, because when you go back, the manipulation, the rage, and the anger will be tantamount to regressing and relapsing into your own old psychosis. So again, I'm gonna end this video on get you some shadow work. Share this video. I know people like a little gossip and a little whatever, but sometimes we got to hit these serious topics because our people need help. So, signing to you out of Detroit. Peace. Keep your head on the swivel. Stay healthy.